And we are live. Hi, welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Today, I am super excited to have my good friend Sarah Pinborough on the show with me. Sarah has been with me a couple of times on my other show that I do, but I couldn't wait to get her here in the Storycraft Cafe. Welcome to the show, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. And I know that we've obviously spoken a few times before because you're the only person in America who pronounces my surname right.
I don't know what to say
You
to
get
that,
a
Sarah,
gold
but thank
star
you.
every time you say Sarah Pinborough. And America is very Sarah Pinborough. Which I don't mind. I'm used to it. But when I hear someone in America saying it right, I'm like, oh, gold star for them.
You know, I do like to pride myself in doing a bit of research and what I can get right, I do like to get right. There are times where, you know, you just can't get things right. But
Although you have the perfect accent for Pinborough because
well,
you've got
thank
that
you.
little drawl, that little lilt, that
Well,
great American drawl.
it's it's probably because I'm from the American South and
Mm.
we have Scottish and Irish heritage both, and maybe it's some of that, or maybe I'm being self-important. I don't know, but oh man, it's been kind of an exciting week for you. You've got a new book release, don't you?
Oh, yes, we have Insomnia came out last Tuesday from Morrow, and so far so good. The Washington Post likes it, the New York Times likes it. So I'm hoping readers will like it because kind of that's the important bit. But I'm hoping it seems to be doing okay so far in this very strange world we live in.
Well, the Post and the Times aside, I like it, so
Well, that's the most
that
important
means
thing.
something, right?
Yes.
Well, I think readers are gonna like it, and that's what really matters.
Yeah,
People that
hopefully.
plunk down their money and put that on the line, those are the people that really matter. That
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
totally, totally.
yeah.
But you tend to get more of them when the newspapers like it too.
Well, true, true. If you have someone, kind of boosting the signal, that
Yeah, it
helps for
always
sure.
helps.
Well, we're gonna get into talking all about insomnia and all that good stuff in just a minute, but for this show, we've been having some fun starting the conversation with a question that I came up with, Sarah, and it is, what is a piece of writing advice that you have gotten along your career somewhere that was either really good advice that you've held on to and it has mattered to you, maybe over and over again, or maybe there's a really terrible piece of advice that has stuck with you that maybe you did take and you regret, or maybe you just kind of laugh to yourself and think, oh gosh, I'm so glad I didn't listen to that piece of advice.
Oh, and there's probably lots of bad advice along the way because everybody thinks their advice is the right advice, and
Right.
it's all down to personal experience. But one piece of very, very good advice, and it's more story advice actually, and it came from a producer of a TV show I wrote on in the UK called New Tricks, which was a crime show. And I put this piece of advice a couple of years ago when I was plotting a book. I remembered it and I put it on Facebook, and people were just imploding with, "Oh my God, that's such a good way to look at it." And so
Right.
it was about crime really. And he said to me, the investigation can be as complicated as you like. It can be as complex and as convoluted as you want. But what happens on the night has to be really simple. And that I think is a really good approach to crime. Like the actual motivation and what happened has to be really straightforward. Everything
Right.
else can be complicated and diverting. So it was a really interesting way to look at writing any form of crime fiction. And in fact, you can translate that to any plot whatsoever. The central core concept has to
Right.
be quite tight, and then everything else can be as bonkers as you want it to be.
Right.
So I'd rather praise someone than pull out a piece of terrible advice that was given. Although I'm sure, to be fair, I've probably given a lot of bad advice as well.
Haven't we all? Haven't
Yeah.
we
My
all?
main advice to people is just, oh, get on with it. It's not brain surgery.
Advice you never want to give to a brain surgeon.
Well, true. Yes, true.
Sarah, I'm glad you brought up that point about plot because the types of books that you write that are um, that have kind of become your sweet spot in publishing, and you've written kind of all along the genre spectrum, which is something else I want to touch on in just a minute. But um, the types of books that you have become known for are psychological suspense bordering on horror. And let's be honest, the farther you go along your writing path, the more close to horror you get. It's
Like full
you're
circle.
yeah, you're
I started out as a horror writer, and I'll end up back as a horror writer.
that's so funny. That's so funny. But those books tend to be, especially with a crime element, tend to be plot heavy. Yet your books are very um, close, kind of close camera, if you will, character studies, because
Mm.
we're getting literally inside characters' heads that you've come up with, and so they're very character driven. How do you balance character versus plot, especially with the types of books that you write?
Well, I think again, it comes back to that tight conceit at the core.
Mhm.
Behind her eyes, how far would you go for obsessional love?
Right,
How far would you go for that? This one is, I don't want to give too much away, but it's, are you going mad or is someone doing it to you? That kind of sort of
right.
is the question. And I'm very much, I mean, I'm not comparing myself to either of these people, but I really like sort of Hitchcock and Polanski style
Mhm.
paranoia, claustrophobia, ordinary people put into strange situations, and especially in a domestic situation where it's your marriage, your home, your life. And I think it's now, I don't particularly want to write another marriage trauma book because I feel like I've done a few and everyone's doing them. But I do think I bring my certain little flavor to it. So for me, I think if you're going to do what I do and add some weird into it, you really have to get in the characters' heads because,
Right.
like, my problem with a lot of horror novels, especially especially bad ones, I mean, in particular bad ones, because this is clearly an example of bad or inexperienced. I'll say inexperienced because I've read some good crime writers who've tried to write a horror novel and they've done this. So my problem with a horror novel, like a ghost story where someone sees a ghost very early on in the
Mhm.
book, and they're like, "Oh my god, I've seen a ghost," and then they go on like this, or they're, "Oh my god, this ghost is following me around," and they tell someone, and then someone else believes them, and then they're on this investigation. And I think, well, that's not how it would work. If I started to see something that wasn't there, I would think, number one, oh my god, I've got a brain tumor. Number two, am I going mad? But
Right.
it's a very insular for before I even got to anything supernatural, I'm gonna go through all those paranoias and worries and stresses, and it will all be internal.
Right.
So I think when you're gonna go weird, you have to really ground your world you're in, so that when it starts to go weird, people will go along with it, So, like with a ghost story, I think it's better to have a few creaks, a few like a little build up before anything is seen, if anything is ever seen. So in this, there is weird, but it starts with her worrying about her personal history that's come back into her life with her family, and then trying to keep that secret from her husband, then not sleeping, and then worrying about the past repeating itself. And all of this is going on before we even start to think there's anything odd happening. Does that make any sense? It's late in the
Absolutely.
day on a Friday, Hank. You're gonna have to work with me here. I'm 50. I should be napping.
When you start conceiving a book, and this is something that I've loved digging into with people uh, lately is the moment of creation is kind of a magical time. That in one moment, a book like Insomnia does not exist in any form or fashion. It just doesn't exist. And then either a character walks onto the stage of your mind, and you're like, well, who is this, and what are they up to, and what are these strange circumstances that are happening to this person, or maybe you watch a news broadcast on television, and it starts the what if game to playing in your mind, and then you cast, that story with characters that you've made up. And then in that moment, the story does exist in some form, and then it's your job as the writer to dig that out, or to excavate it, as I like to say, to, you get the idea of archaeologist, doing the tedious work of getting this thing out of the ground.
Dusting down all the little bits
Yes,
to see if
yes,
they
with the
hold together.
with the little brushes, and, and then that becomes the work of the writer. But what is that first moment of inspiration that kicks off the whole thing,
Oh
that gets the
God.
synapses firing?
It really depends. Sorry, my dog's come to say hello. So he's just like,
Hello, dog.
What's going on? I was asleep and now you're talking." Um, it can depend really. I mean, often they're not as kind of wonderful as just the moment arrives. Often I'll have half an idea for something else, and then while mulling that, I'll get a better idea, or I'll
Yeah,
think, "Oh, actually, what if, what if, what if?" So with Behind Your Eyes, I wanted to write about a marriage and an affair and something quite obsessional, obviously with a
right.
murder. And I wanted to put dreams in it because I dream a lot, and I think you can be very influenced about how your nights are spent, and all this stuff. And then I just kind of had the ending just came to me in that I was jotting down bits about the characters and who was dead and who wasn't and who was in the well. And then I was like, oh, actually, what if I went really bonkers with this? And then I had to seed it all the way through. I mean, I always, always, always have to have the ending like fully locked in. So I will often see the whole final chapter, even down to like the occasion, like dialogue in it. Like with
Yeah,
the last chapter of Behind Your Eyes was in the pitch for the book. So with Insomnia, though, I had a different book idea. It was still, I mean, it was, I say it's similar. I don't think it was similar at all. But I had a working wife who was very high powered, a stay at home dad. But the wife was much less relatable and much less likable in a lot of ways, and had her own secrets. Whereas Emma is definitely our heroine of our piece. I mean, we don't know if she's going mad. Whatever she does or doesn't do is not in her past. It's in her future,
right, right.
So she's not carrying any big secrets in any terrible way, like a lot of psychological thriller characters do. But I was chatting with some other women, actually, two producers I know, about female guilt. And they were saying, doesn't matter what you do, like if you miss a parents' evening, it's worse for the woman than it is for the man. It's all these
Right.
things that are still, even if you're be the main breadwinner, and there's still these sort of gender expectations, as it were.
Sure.
So I thought, well, I want to play with that a little bit. And then we were talking about our relationships with our mothers, and I thought, well, let's take that to the extreme. And worrying about getting older, and I thought, well, let's throw that in there as well. And then I don't sleep very well, and the pandemic arrived, and no one was sleeping, and I found it really interesting that it was women who were not sleeping, still doing the homeschooling, and I think women, we worried more, especially at the
Right.
start, than men. We were very much of that, "Oh my god, this thing could kill us. Wash your hands, stay at home." And men were still a bit, "It's gonna be fine. It'll be gone by summer," you know? A lot of my
Right.
friends' husbands, anyway, were still like, "It'll be fine." And then they slowly caught up with the rest of us. But so I wanted to kind of play with all of that. So it's never a lightning bolt moment for me. It's always pages of notes and scrawls. And in fact, my agent came up to visit me yesterday, and we were talking, and I said, "Oh God, I've never felt like this before where I'm scrabbling for an idea." She went, "Sarah, you feel this every single time." I was like, "Oh." She goes, "It's like childbirth. You just forget." She goes, "I
Right.
remember because it's me you're on the phone to going, maybe I'm never going to write another book again." And then you're like, "Oh, I think I have an idea." So
That's funny. Speaking of COVID, I've wondered over the last year and a half or so what this time and this collective experience that we've all been through, how that is going to show up in in art and in books specifically. And I can count on one hand the amount of stories that I've encountered that actually reference directly the COVID pandemic,
Oh, I think
and,
it's too soon, don't you think?
well,
Like,
I
I've
do
seen a
think it's
couple of
too soon.
novels.
I
Yeah,
think it's
someone
too
sent me a
soon.
novel to
Y
read, and it was apparently a really great book, and it was, like, set in lockdown, and I was like, "I have absolutely no interest in reading anything
r
about lockdown."
right,
And
right,
I
well,
also think emotionally, it's gonna be another 10 years before we really know how we
right.
feel about this time, you know?
But I think what we are going to see are stories like Insomnia that are, that COVID was a sort of a catalyst for, and
Mm,
it's not that the book is about COVID at all, but those feelings, um, have to come out, be dealt with, be expressed in some fashion, and I'm really excited if we can be excited about anything with COVID. But I'm excited to see the ways that people are taking this kind of generalized angst and what the interpretation of that's going to be.
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
It is.
I think a lot of people just kinda have got back to normal. I mean, I've got back to normal now. I'm pretty much zen with it. You know, our whole
Yeah,
country is like we've got 1 in 10 people have it, so there's no point in worrying about it. Otherwise, you'd never leave your house. So, you know,
exactly.
I have to go into London and have meetings and stuff. So I don't really and I had it very, very early on back in the 2020. So, I'm kinda like hoping that's given me a bit of extra resolve. But I also think people forget very quickly. You know, I
Right.
don't see huge swathes of literature talking about the Spanish flu.
Right.
You don't there's not I think
Right.
people forget we forget very quickly when we go through these things. So I don't know, I'm not sure, but I do think it'll be a while before people really, really kind of
Yeah.
reflect on the full and also, I guess it's different. I mean, if you were unfortunate enough to lose loved ones, it's gonna have a much bigger impact
Right.
than if you didn't have to worry about your job, you had a nice home to sit in, you had a garden, you lived in a
Right.
nice bit of town. I think it's different if you lived in a high rise in London and you couldn't get to your job and you ran out of money, and then that's gonna
Yeah.
have a massive impact.
Yeah.
So, I'm being a bit watch your privilege, Pinborough, in my comments, because actually for a lot of people, it was a you know, there's a lot more emotional baggage coming out the
Well,
back end.
sure. Sure. Well, it's interesting because we've seen a big boom in historical fiction, specifically around the World War II era, in the
Mm,
last maybe 5 years or so. And I've often wondered why the spike in interest in this particular era is now, and maybe it's because the people of that generation are quickly going away, and we're
mm.
losing those stories,
Yeah.
and we're grasping at anything we can to hold on to that, the so that the people and their particular stories aren't lost,
I think
to the
you're right,
sands of
actually.
time.
I think there is a kind of, "We've gotta get this stuff down while the
Right,
people are there," kind of thing, you know? I remember when my dad was dying, I'd ask him a lot about his childhood just because I was like, "Well, I'm never gonna get to ask these questions again." His
right,
brothers and sisters have scattered to the well, I think they're nearly all dead now. It's
yeah.
terrible. But,
So
you know, so
maybe
you
it'll be
do
the 2060s or 2070s before we get,
the COVID
the big
stories.
COVID
Yeah.
stories,
God.
That'd be okay with me, that'd be okay with
Mm.
me.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm like, I could live without it.
Right,
You know,
right.
I might lob in a bit of hand sanitizer in one chapter, but that's about it. I mean, I work a lot in TV and film, and even in the height of lockdown, I was working on one pilot, and I said, "Are we referencing COVID in this?" And they were like, "Oh God, no. God, no." I was like, "Cool, that's fine by me. It's fine by me."
Well, speaking of that, and we touched on it earlier, and I said we would come back around to it, but, you have been, a writer that has delved into a number of genres, from horror to psychological suspense, some YA, some fairy tale retellings, um,
Historical fiction.
historical, there's, and the conventional wisdom as far as publishing is concerned is find something that an audience likes that you do and never deviate from that. Stay with what people love about you. And that
That was good advice, and if I'd done that, I probably would have had a better career, a longer
well,
career.
and we can
Or
argue the
faster. I mean,
merits
like,
of that.
it's kind of I mean, like, I think Behind Her Eyes was my 23rd book. So, I'd written a lot of books in a lot of genres, and it was hard. And it was difficult for publishers because, and I find it difficult, especially before Behind Her Eyes, people would say, oh, which I liked, let's say they say, I liked your fairy tales. Which of your books should I read next? I'm like, I literally have no idea because they're all quite different. So I think 13 Minutes was kind of my first thriller, really, even though it was a YA thriller.
Yeah.
So when I had written Behind Her Eyes, people would say, oh, what else? I'd be like, oh, 13 Minutes. But actually, I think readers do just, if they like your storytelling, they'll go along with most stories, I think. Like I've got people who thought Behind Her Eyes was my first book, who've now gone back and bought all the other books. Thank them very much. But they, they like them. And I think, well, they're all different. So it's quite interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, it is good advice to pick a lane and stay in it. But I'm just really bad at that.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a moment because, as readers, I love to read all over the place. I love to read a bit of horror. I love to read thrillers. I love to read, I'll I'll read a historical romance. I'm all over the place. And if we are that way as readers, then writers obviously have varied things that they're interested in, and um, so how do you scratch that itch as a writer to tell all of the different kinds of stories that you want to tell, while also maintaining your ability to have a successful writing career? And maybe this is an unfair question because you kind of wrote those other things before your huge success as a thriller slash uh, psychological suspense slash horror
Slash weird.
author. But what do you think about that? How do you
Me, I
interpret
mean,
the navigating the waters?
well, if I want to write something that's not one of those things, I'll either write a short story or something and get it out that way, or I'll pitch it for television because they're a little broader in what you can do in different, you're not in one lane in television or film.
Right.
So, I can pitch a crime show with one company and pitch a fantasy show with another company and, and do it that way. But with books, it's very tricky because when I was starting out, and by that I mean all the way up to that 23rd book, really, I wasn't getting paid huge amounts. I was getting paid nicely, but I wasn't getting paid big money. And so they can let you be freer with what you write, especially the
Mhm.
fantasy horror community and publishers. They're a bit more, they give you a bit more space.
Yeah.
There's, so I could do a few more different things. They know they're going to get their money back. They know that, they haven't invested that much. They're not going to spend a huge amount on marketing. But then if you have a book like Behind Her Eyes, where you're suddenly selling hundreds of thousands of copies, people have paid you quite a lot of money, they've paid for a second book, they need it to be in the same vein because
Right.
you and you more than me, I think, read broadly. A lot of people don't read broadly. A lot of people want to go in the supermarket, they want to pick up a thriller, they want to read they're not necessarily fans of in the thriller market, the psychological thriller market, that you don't really get that fan base thing you get in fantasy. They're very much book by book by book rather than author by author. Until you get to Harlan Coben, Ian Rankin,
Right.
that kind of level.
Right.
Whereas in fantasy, I think people have much more dedicated readers. Like if Joe Abercrombie wrote a crime novel, I'm not sure his fantasy readers would necessarily stick with him, but they'd definitely buy the first one. It's that,
Right.
I think there's that kind
Right.
of thing. So it is very difficult. And I do get urges to change what I'm writing. And to be honest, I am quite tired of writing psychological thrillers. So I think the next one will be a crime novel with some weird in it rather than a psychological thriller with some weird in it. More of a sort of sprawling kind of Stephen King-esque town sort of crime novel, multiple characters, third person, past tense, that
But you
kind of
just can't
stuff.
leave the weird alone, can you?
No, that's in my blood. I always have to have the weird. The weird's always there. I can't help that.
Love it. So speaking of Behind Her Eyes, my 17-year-old son came to my wife and I several months ago, I think it was, and he said, "I've discovered this new show on Netflix, and y'all have to watch it with me." And he turned it on, and I was like, "Why does this seem so familiar?" And I was like, "Oh, this is my friend Sarah's book." And like I pulled up my podcast. I was like, "See, she's been on my show a couple of times." And he just, it was so funny. But having your work interpreted, um to a successful television show on Netflix. And I know that you've also written screenplays and things
Mhm.
like that, but what does that do, um, monetary success aside,
Yeah.
what does that do for your creative process to have, something that you've written, interpreted, and exposed to an audience that, like my 17-year-old son does not read the same things that I read,
Yeah.
yet this thing bridged, built a bridge between, he and I, and, it was really cool. What does that do for your creative process as a creative person?
I'm not sure what it does for my creative processes, but it was crazy good, Like I loved like when you write a book, I mean, you know what it's like. Your work is out there and slowly reviews trickle in and you're already on the next thing and blah blah blah. And it's all a bit slow. Whereas with
Yeah,
this, I could literally track the hashtag on Twitter and watch people's minds exploding as they got to the end. And it was a bit kind of I was a bit like, "Oh my god, this came out of my head," and all these millions of people, because it's such a lot of people. Like, if you sold
right.
that many books, I'd be living in a castle. I'd be saying, "Hank, I'm sending the jet. We're gonna do this in my by my pool, with a beer." You know, if I'd sold that many books. But having all those people watching something that's come out of your head, I guess it's a bit like getting an insight into how it must feel to be someone like Stephen King, where so many people you're such a part of like, it was like
Right,
a tiny little raindrop of what it must be like to be that, which was so surreal, but also amazing because also I was happy with it and they were very close to the book and I thought they did it really well, and
yeah.
so it was a really good experience. So and, creatively, I don't think it really changed me apart from everybody in the world, in every TV company everywhere was wanting a psychological thriller from me, as if that you could just snap them out of air,
Right. Well, the Storycraft Cafe, this writers community that we're building, and with this podcast is, an outgrowth of, it is really providing a place where writers can commiserate with each other and share successes and burdens and struggles and motivate each other and encourage one another and all the things that humans need, the interaction that we all crave and validation that we need from one another. As someone who's written 20 some odd, novels to date, do you have a community of people around you that you trust and that you, share your work with or go to when you're having one of those days?
Yeah, I mean, I don't share my work so much now, but, I guess I think I've got 2 sort of groups of buddies, and one is from the horror community, so Tim Leben and Chris Golden and Mark Morris, and there's a few of us at Conrad Williams that go back a long time, like Tim was my first writer friend. And the good thing about the pandemic was actually we started to Zoom more, and we hadn't done that, he's got his career, family life, I'm busy. And so you end up just dropping each other the odd email or seeing each other at a
Right.
convention or something. But it doesn't happen very often because especially when I've been doing thrillers, I'm going to crime conventions, he's going to horror conventions. But yeah, they are definitely the people when you don't want to. I'm not a great believer in sharing your failures publicly. I don't think it does anyone any good and it makes you look like you're bitter, like, I see a lot of people
Right.
getting bitter
Yeah.
on Facebook, and I'm like, "No, save that. Just keep that in. Go and find someone that you can go for a beer with and let that out.
Mm,
Just take a break from social media and come back in when you're in a good place." That's just my perspective, I just find that I don't mean for people's personal stuff, whatever people wanna say about their lives is up to them, but professionally, I think you have to be careful. So, look, you never know who's seeing your Twitter, or someone might look up, they wanna work with you and they see something negative about a producer is not a good look, or
yeah.
about an editor or whatever. So I have that group, and then in crime, I have a couple of really good friends, and yeah, we I call them my musketeers. and we're always like in little sort of round robin emails, and then we go to some of the festivals together and that kind of thing. It's nice. I mean, I'm not an overly social person. I'm quite good with people, but I'm not overly social. I just like the people that, I'm fine on
Yeah.
a stage. I'm not so great meeting lots of new people. So I tend to stick with the people I know and then slowly add people in,
Right. Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think back to the beginning of my career when I was starting out writing horror. And we didn't have Facebook. Sorry, I'm just readjusting myself. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Twitter.
Yeah.
We didn't even have MySpace. So there were things that were super important to me, like the British Fantasy Society used to have like these open nights, they called them, and they'd have them in a pub in London. And so there'd be lots of people there, like Mike Marshall Smith, who was doing really well at the time, and Stephen Jones, who did all the anthologies, and Adam Neville.
Right.
And so many people would go. And I was teaching. And it was like the only time I got to be around other writers, and I would literally finish school at 3. I'd drive home like an hour, quickly get changed, jump on a train, go into London, and I'd be so excited just to hang out with other writers or people I admired or whatever. And Tim Lebbon was a guest of honor at when my first book came out, 2004 December. He was guest of honor at World Horror. I think it was in the March 2005. I'd never been to a convention. I didn't know, I was like, I'm not going to know anyone. I'd just split up with my boyfriend. And so my dad said, look, I'll come with you. If you hate it, we'll have 5 days in New York. We'll just go off and do stuff.
Yeah.
If you find your feet and you like it, I'll take care of myself. You go and do whatever you got to do. I'll find bars. And my dad was really social. He would he literally that trip, I went to find him in a bar, and he had one guy was taking him on a helicopter tour the next day. Another guy, it was like he'd walked into Cheers.
It's so
But
funny.
but it was so great, and I met so many people there, and then I realized that actually those conventions and festivals could be really great experiences. And now there's way more women as well, which is better.
Right.
Get used to, because I think women were always working. They just never went to the festivals. They're a bit like, just a bunch of blokes standing around talking about comics. But it was really good, and it was good to meet. And I would meet people that I thought were like so impressive. And I remember meeting James Moore. Do you know James Moore? He's a
I
horror writer.
I
Jim Moore.
don't know him, but I know of him.
Yeah, and I had read a couple of his books, and I saw him, and I was like, oh my god, it's Jim Moore. It was just really weird how you'd like, and now I'm like, oh, it's Jim.
Yeah.
But so I kind of miss those days when everything was aspirational. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? You
I
kind of like when
do.
you're all excited and it's new and it's all sort of, oh my god, maybe one day I'll have more than one book.
Well, speaking of that, when most people begin their writing career, they are, um, they're writing as a hobby, and then they have aspirations that hobby, becomes their, their career,
Mm.
and there's a balance to, writing wherever you can find the time, and squeezing in, moments here and there. But then when you become a career writer, and writing is your job, what does that do to kind of your mindset of, waking up every day and, okay, now I have to be a writer today, as opposed to, I have to go to the office, and then I'm going to squeeze in 15 minutes here or there to do the writing. Is there a mind shift that happens when this is your job now?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while now. I reckon I've been writing full time about 13, 14 years, so it's hard to
Wow.
remember. But yes, and one thing that did strike me actually was with some of these. So there was Steve Volk, Tim Lebbon, Adam Neville, me, um, Mark Morris. There was a few of us that would get a cottage. We'd rent a
Okay.
cottage. We'd go for a writing weekend. So Adam Neville would get the train to Milton Keynes. I would drive him from here. Everyone would converge in some, cheap cottage, take
Yeah.
loads of food, and we'd have Friday night with dinner and drinks and laugh and catch up. And then we would all have our workspaces. We'd get breakfast, we'd work a few hours, have some lunch, work a few more hours, and then get drunk and chat and whatever, and then repeat the next day. And they were great. And, again, we'd race down there, try and get, like, we're going to do 8,000 words or whatever. But then Tim Lebbon and I both went full time, and it just wasn't quite the same, because it was almost like it's the weekend. I don't want to write. right? I just want to do the sitting around drinking and chatting bit,
Right.
because it wasn't like you had to get as many hours in as you could or squeeze it in your lunch hour or that kind of thing. I think it does become more of a job, and I
Yeah.
think as with all things, with every experience you have, you realize there's lows and there's highs. Not everything is trajectory like this. It can
Sure.
go down and go up. And so, 20 years ago, I was like, oh my God, this is just the most exciting thing in my life. And now I'm like, even when something good happens, I'm like, oh, what's going to go wrong? It's so you have to remind yourself to enjoy the highs because there's a huge amount of lows.
Right.
It's a job of failure, isn't it? It's a job where failure is the standard. You
Yeah.
send the book in, 9 times out of 10, they're gonna say no. It could be the best book in the world. They haven't had their coffee. They've read one just like it. They've bought one just like it. Whatever it is, that could be the end of your dream with that publisher for at least one more year. So
Mm,
it's constantly battling failure, isn't it, this job? I'm so
right.
cheerful.
Well, it's Friday, it's
Yeah.
this is what you get on a Friday. Um, some writers hold, to the ideal that they write every single day. Maybe it's 100 words, maybe it's 1,000 words, but every single day. I have a friend who's like that. Even on Christmas Day, he's going to get 1,000 words in. Period.
Mm,
No excuses. And then I know other people that write seasonally, if you will. There's when a new novel is coming about, there's a time for plotting and planning and just kind of letting all the ideas ruminate. And then there's the drafting stage, and
mm,
for 90 days they work on that first draft. And then there's editing and all the stuff that comes after that. But then when all of that is done, they don't write again until it's time for the next story, and they go kind of
mm.
through that process again. Do you fall in either one of those camps?
I used to be or must do 2,000 words a day, blah, blah, blah. That was when all I did was write novels. And
Right.
actually, I have learned that the thinking time is far more important than the word count, because I could write 90,000 words in 2 months. They wouldn't be
Yeah.
the best 90,000 words I'd ever written in my life, because actually mulling it over can get better results. And also, I
Well, a
mean,
lot of times thinking is writing.
yeah, and also, so currently I'm working on 3 TV projects, 2 film projects, and I've got to write a book. So it's like the book can often get pushed to one side because it's not the most immediate thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I do write every day, not necessarily on a book. I work every day. Put it that way.
Yeah.
I work every day. I work Christmas Day. I work all the day, all the time. Like it's just
Yeah.
even if I'm watching telly, I'll be kind of
Yeah.
ticking
Th
over.
those are some of the best times for me.
Oh.
Just the disengaging your brain,
It's like when you
letting
turn
it.
the light out and you're like, "Oh, I'm
Yeah.
so tired." Then you turn your light out and you're like,
You're
"What if
like,
this happened and then
"Oh."
that happened and this happened?" You have to like send yourself a
Right.
voice note or
Yeah,
something.
and then 3 hours later, you realize you haven't gone to sleep
Yeah,
and,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Wow. Do you think we'll see, any screen adaptations for Insomnia like we did Behind Her
Oh,
Eyes?
I've just finished. I've just got to do a couple of tweaks on episode 1, and then Left Bank, who
Ooh,
made Behind Her Eyes, will be taking it out to various broadcasters. We've got a couple that are keen, so we'll
can't
see.
wait. Can't
We will
wait.
see. I'm hoping so. I mean, we should do. I think they're pretty confident we'll get it away, but never count your
Yeah,
chickens and all that stuff. Yeah.
all that stuff, yeah. Well, Sarah, this has been so much fun catching up. For all the people for the 3 people out there that are not familiar with your work,
Oh, you
um
charmer.
tell them where they can find you online and dig into all the great stuff that you do.
They can find me on Twitter as Sarah Pinborough. I'm on Instagram as Sarah Pinborough Books. That's probably the 2 places to find me, mainly Twitter. I have Facebook, but that's more family and friends kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you can find my books in all good bookstores and obviously the demon headmaster that is Amazon. But to be fair, every day the Amazon man comes to my house, so I can't really, say anything bad about them.
Right. Right. Well, speaking of that, I have to ask you this because Insomnia is available in Kindle edition if
Oh,
you like to read that way, or hardcover, or audiobook. I love your audiobooks.
oh, thanks.
What do you think about having your work translated to audio?
I literally can't listen to any of it. I can't listen. I just feels weird to hear it to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
just I can't. And they did it. They did the thing on Radio 4 here for Behind Rise. They called it Book at Bedtime, and they and it's quite a big deal. And they abbreviated it and everything. But I still couldn't listen, even though they'd got actors in. And I've listened to the very opening of Insomnia on the audiobook, and people have said to me, "Oh, I loved it," but I just am like, whoa, that's
It's
weird.
it's a new experience. I got the advanced reader copy months ago, I
Mm.
guess, from your publisher. And you flip through and you read it, and then you listen to the audiobook, and it's like a completely different experience. I don't know what it is. It's the same words, it's the same story, but it's
Audiobooks are massive in America, aren't they? I mean,
they
I
are.
sold a lot of audiobooks. I think maybe because people drive so much,
Maybe that's
yeah,
what it is. Well, and
really,
the
they're
the
much bigger
advent
there.
well, and the advent of smartphones have
Mm.
definitely spurred that along.
I mean,
We've had books on tape for years, but
I'm trying them. I've got Audible now because I thought actually I could listen to a book in bed, but I can't get into it. Not even just my books. I just can't get into audiobook. I don't know why. I
that's
must try
that's
harder.
so
It's 'cause I'm
funny.
so old, Hank.
They changed my life, I'll tell you. There's not
Oh,
many things that you can actually say changed your life, and, but
oh,
yeah, audiobooks
I'm
did.
gonna give it a
Anyway,
go then. I
that's a
shall try
side tangent, and that's free for whoever needs that, get into
That's your
audiobooks.
advice for the
Yeah.
day. Give them a go.
Yes. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me in the
Well, thank you
Storycraft
for having
Cafe.
me again, and I promise you, if I ever get that super, super millions and millions, if I ever have that, Gone Girl or Girl on a Train moment when the whole world has bought my book, I will ship you in on a private jet, and we'll meet on the
Let's
beach, and we'll do
let's
the
do
next
it.
one live.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Thank you, Sarah. Have a great
Thank
day.
you, and you.